Welcome to our February History Talk. Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Felicia. I am the Associate Curator for the Lacey Museum. I am joined by Museum Assistant Olympia, who's moderating the virtual part of the presentation at the back of the room. Today feels particularly special because our presentation tonight is with our very own Lacey Museum Curator, Erin Quinn Valcho. Erin will be presenting her research and revealing the mysterious past of O.C. Lacey for the first time. This program may exceed 1 hour, but we will do our best to stay within the time limit, just in case. For our in-person audience tonight, we do have light refreshments. We have snacks that are gluten-free as well on the table in the bowl. For folks in person, if you haven't already, we'd love for you to sign in after the conclusion of tonight's program. This helps us get an accurate count for attendance. You can also use that form to sign up for our newsletter. So before we begin tonight's program, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement and some recent museum news. Maybe. There we go. The Lacey Museum is on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Squally Indian Tribe and Squaxin Island Tribe. We acknowledge and remember those tribal people not recognized today who were absorbed or relocated into other tribes for survival. We recognize the ancestors and their descendants who are still here. We recognize and respect the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek as the traditional stewards of this land since time immemorial, and their role today in taking care of these lands in perpetuity. We recognize and have the responsibility to call attention to the histories of dispossession, forced removal, and abridged treaty rights that allowed our nation, state, and city to develop as they have today. We recommend that community members read the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854. So, many of you probably have heard already this exciting news, but if you haven't, the Lacey Museum is moving to a new location. The current museum, located in the Russell House on Lacey Street, is closed, and the museum will reopen in its new location on 6th Avenue at the Belltown Center this year, and we will let you know as soon as we have more specific details and an opening date. The existing museum location is still going to be in operation, but this will become a dedicated research center where people can explore museum library, archives, subject files, genealogy collection, and more. We hope you'll join us next month for a History Talk presentation titled You Got the Tape On? Washington State Parks Black Civilian Conservation Corps Enrollees. In this presentation, Sam Watipka, Exhibit Program Coordinator for the Washington State Parks and Recreation Commission, will trace the Depression-era expansion of Washington State Park system and contextualize the contributions and experiences of the Black CCC workers. As always, we will hold our Q&A section at the end of tonight's presentation, and we will do our best to get both questions from in-person and online attendees. For those online, if you have any questions for Erin during the presentation, feel free to submit them using that Q&A button that should be at the bottom of your screen. And for those in person, I will be walking around with a microphone so folks that are viewing from home can hear your questions. Now I would like to introduce tonight's speaker, Erin Quinn Valcho. Erin Quinn Valcho is a native Washingtonian who grew up in Bellingham and graduated from Pacific Lutheran University. Graduate school took her to Colorado, where she graduated from the University of Denver with a master's in anthropology and museum studies. She has been a museum professional for over 25 years with positions at the Denver Art Museum, Denver Firefighters Museum, and the Greeley Museums. She is currently on the editorial board of the Thurston County Historical Journal. She has been the curator at the Lacey Museum for over 10 years and is glad to have found her home. Thank you, Erin, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for braving the weather and coming to see this, because I am so excited to share with you what I have planned for tonight. But before we dive into solving this mystery, I need to acknowledge the work of the people who have come before me, former museum staff members and curators, and in particular, Lanny Weaver, who was the president of the Lacey Historical Society for quite a long time. It was the bulk of her research that is the foundation for the presentation I'm going to give you tonight. All right. So I'm guessing you know that there's a reason why we're talking about this guy, O.C. Lacey, tonight. It has indeed been his name that has become attached to our city, but this was kind of by accident, really. I mean, he was not a founder of Lacey. He didn't have a lot to do with the community at all, and it was called Woodland then, in case you didn't know. But during 1891, the big thing that was kind of going on was that the railroad was coming to town, and people thought, wow, I think it's time for us to have a post office because the railroad can just bring it right into the train station. So they did, and they put in this application for Woodland. But you can see there at the top that it says, select another name. And that's because, of course, there's already a Woodland, Washington. They beat us by like 10 years. They got theirs first. So we had to pick another name. This is the new application with the name Lacey on it right there. See, it says select a short name. Lacey's short, and it doesn't match any other name in the state, so it met all the requirements. How did Lacey's name get on here? We don't really know. My theory is that his firm was engaged in the services to get this application done. But tales vary as to whether he got permission to put his name on there or not. And I don't know, we may never know. But really, it was just a post office name. It wasn't necessarily intended to be a transformative name for our city. But you can see here in this St. Martin's College advertisement how confusing it was, right? Lacey P.O., post office, Woodland Railroad Station. Where are we? We don't know. So in 1902, citizens got together and were like, we need to fix this. This is getting really crazy. So they changed the name of the train station to Lacey. And over time, eventually, it was the community that was also called Lacey until it was formally made into a city in 1966. But O.C. Lacey was from Olympia. He lived there, he worked there, he did not live or work here. But his name has become forever attached to our city, and because of that, people are going to always be interested in who he was. People always want to know how a community got his name, and we're no different. So now I'm going to share with you what we have known about him up until this point. So his full name is Oliver Chester Lacey, although he almost always went by O.C. Occasionally he would go by Chester, but never Oliver. This is the only picture that we have of him from a newspaper sketch. He was born in about 1850 or 51, and he was born in Richmond, Virginia. And here's a picture of what Richmond, Virginia looked like at that time. He arrived in Olympia in 1889 with this lovely announcement that he probably went to the newspaper and said, hey, I'm here, tell about it. Mr. Chester Lacey, late of Chicago, has opened his real estate office. So he opened his office and got right to work. By early 1890, he began working with H.L. Forrest, and they had a firm together called Lacey and Forrest. Forrest was an attorney, and that's a typical advertisement that was frequently in the newspaper. They sold real estate and did insurance and that sort of stuff. And then this image, this Edward Lang print is of the office building at 4th and Main, downtown Olympia, which was where their offices were. And then I don't know whether it was because he was inspired by his partner or they thought they could bring in more business, but he decided that being an attorney would be a great idea. So he passed the bar in 1891, and they put this announcement in the newspaper announcing that their firm was now a law firm. And then in 1893, they dissolved their partnership, it seems amicably, most likely because he was applying to become a judge. And he did become a judge, and opened up his office. And frequently, over the next couple of years, he was in the paper all the time, like at least once a week, often more than that, talking about his cases and judgments he'd made. He did continue to work as an attorney also. That seemed to be expected of judges at the time, and make real estate investments. And he was very active in the community as well, and in politics. And this is the only picture that we have, like I said, but it's from a court case from when he was a judge. There was a sketch of the plaintiff and the defendant and one of him. Those are some great mutton chops, huh? But then in late 1894, something weird happened. He kind of disappeared. There is like literally nothing in the newspaper. He's just gone. And so then there were these couple of articles, very tiny. Judge Lacey has gone east to remain an indefinite period. O.C. Lacey has gone east, and it doesn't really seem like he's going to come back. Guys, he had a full caseload. You don't just leave and not come back, and so someone else had to pick up his cases. And then he kind of came back, but it was still weird. He just wasn't as active as he was before, and so the truth became apparent in 1895 when his wife filed for divorce. 1895, his wife filed for divorce. In her testimony, she and, as well as other corroborating witnesses, detailed his cruelty, his verbal abuse. He was really mean. And it was bad enough that he was nasty, but on top of that, Emma was not well. She was unhealthy and sick, and he was gone all the time, and she was not able to take care of herself, much less their house, and there was no one to help her. So she had friends and neighbors who were stepping in to help her out, and it was them who encouraged her to get this divorce because she was suffering. But it also came out that he'd been having an affair with another woman for some time, which is probably what caused his many absences. So they both left town after the divorce. He went to Eastern Washington, and she went to Tacoma. But a year later, after their divorce, Emma was living in a cheap hotel in Tacoma. O.C. was not paying her alimony payments. She had no money. She was dead broke. And the way that she got that hotel was with some loan collateral, and O.C. was supposed to pay that, and it was due. And so she left because she didn't have it. She got on a boat to Olympia and went to her friends, and the same friends who helped her with the divorce. But 2 days later, they found her dead on their kitchen floor. And help me. Felicia, can you click? Thank you. So no one could find O.C. They didn't know where he was, and they didn't know who her relatives were. So she was buried in a coffin for the poor in a burial plot that was donated in the Masonic cemetery so that she wouldn't have to be put in a pauper's grave. And this quote is from the Washington Standard. "The indignation against the notorious O.C. Lacey is of such a nature that it would not be a pleasant thing for him to make his appearance in this city." And it seems like he never did come here ever again. After this, there are a few little trickles here and there of him in Eastern Washington and then later in Virginia, which is where he ended up. But we learned from these obituaries that he married again. His second wife was called Ida M., and no children are mentioned. So it doesn't seem like he had any children, at least not according to the obituaries. So he died November 28th, 1905, at his home on the Virginia waterfront at the age of 56. So that's pretty much where we had left it. That's what we had found out up until now. So over the last 10 years, I have picked up this research off and on, just figuring eventually something's going to show up, right? That I'm going to figure this guy out. And, as more records get online and things become available, something's got to turn up. And Lanny and I would touch base and collaborate on little tiny things we found here and there and try to investigate, but nothing really earth-shaking came up, and in particular, before he came to Olympia, there was just nothing. But then one day, something new showed up. I got a record hint on one of the genealogy sites I frequent, and it was just an extraction of information, not the original document, but it was the marriage record for O.C. Lacey and his second wife, Ida. I was eventually able to track down the marriage license. Took me quite some time, but I did find it. But what was most significant to me was I had his parents' names, right? That's the first connection to his past. And, I can do this. I can research his family and find out who he was. This was great. So there it is, Jackson B. Lacey and Caroline A. Burns. So I dug in and I went to town trying to find out who these people were. I looked and I looked and I looked and I looked. I found a Jackson B. Lacey married to a Caroline, but they were not the right age. She would have had to be like 8 when he was born. That was not going to work. And there was no one else. And they didn't have a kid named Oliver or Chester or anything like that. I mean, I couldn't believe I was at another dead end. I'd found this amazing clue and just nothing. So frustrated, I just put it aside for a while and let it sit. I mean, I've got other things to do, right? So when I was ready to get back to it, I thought, well, maybe I should try to find the marriage record for his first marriage. Lanny had already tried, and so I didn't really have a lot of hope for that. So I went back and I reviewed her notes about what she had done. And what she had done was call the county clerk in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, where they were married, and talk to the clerk there and gave them the date of their marriage and their names, and they couldn't find it. And they just said, it's probably just one of those records that's lost. Because that happens, right? But by this time, those records were now online. And it's very different having someone who isn't intimate with the research looking than it is for someone who knows all about it, because you're bound to see things that someone else isn't. So I went to those databases, and nothing came up in a search. I did every search, every variant I could think of. So I had to go to the handwritten index, and trying to find that was fun. And so here in the red box are the 1873 marriages in that county for that began with the letter L. There's 6 here. None of them are Lacey. None of them even look written wrong. I mean, this person has nice handwriting. I can read them. So the only thing for it was that I was going to have to look at these marriage licenses one by one. So I opened up the database and stared at 60,000 images. Now, it wasn't just 1 year. It was many years, but I had to jump around a while and find the right year, which I did. And those were in date order, not in alphabetical order. And there were only 143 of them instead of, 1,000, which is good. So I went to the end of the year, of course, because I was looking for December. There was no marriage on December 23rd. I'm like, really? So I went through every single page one by one looking for the name. Still didn't find anything. There was nothing. And this index didn't exactly match either, so take that as a cautionary tale for your research. It's not always accurate. But there was one record that every time I passed it, I just looked at it. I'm like, there was just something about it that was bugging me. Here it is. It says, Frank B. Wood. I can't really see it very well, but I know this record pretty well, so I'm gonna go for it. It says his father is J.B. Wood, and it says he is living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that he's 24. And it says his wife is Emma C. Brown, and that she's 19 from Mecklenburg County, and it lists her parents' names. And there's just some similarities there, right? Emma C., that's the same as O.C. Lacey's wife's first name, Emma C. They were married on December 22nd, not December 23rd, but I mean, that's pretty close. J.B. Wood, his father's name was listed as Jackson B. Lacey. That's kind of similar. His mom is Carrie Wood. O.C. Lacey's mother was listed as Caroline Lacey. That's pretty close, right? I thought, well, it wouldn't hurt to check it out. So that's what I did. So, yes, it had certainly occurred to me before that maybe he had changed his name. I mean, there was just literally no trace of him, right? There was nothing before 1889. We couldn't find the family that he had listed. I mean, there was just nothing there. So my new hypothesis was, are Frank B. Wood and O.C. Lacey the same person? And if so, why? Why did he change his name? So I built out the family tree, and here it is. Every piece of information on this has a source identified with it. So the father is Jackson Broadus Wood, and the mother is Caroline Antoinette Burns. And they lived in Richmond, Virginia. And they had 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. And Frank was right there in the middle. You can see. I also forgot to mention that their ages were also the same when they got married as the Lacey's were. That was another thing that was similar. Let's see. All right. So back to the parents' names. Now that everything was fully researched, this is how similar they are. Jackson B. Lacey was his name, and Jackson Broadus Wood was Frank's father's name. O.C.'s Lacey mother was Caroline A. Burns, and Frank's mother was Caroline Antoinette Burns. That's even closer, right? So then I found the obituary of Frank's father, Dr. Jackson B. Wood. It was very long. He was a very prominent member of the community. But what I have circled here is what was most interesting to me, because it lists his children, and one of them is Frank B. Wood of the state of Washington. None of these people are anywhere near Washington, Oregon, nothing. They're all in the South and the East. So that stuck out to me. I'm like, okay, that seems pretty solid. That was the first thing that made me go, okay, maybe I've got something here. So then I went to look at some of the records I already had. These are his obituaries that were in the Virginia paper. And this sentence is the one that sticks out to me now. Mrs. Lacey, who was visiting in Baltimore when death came to her husband, reached home yesterday morning, and Dr. Wood, a relative from Richmond, also came down yesterday. When I originally read this, I thought Dr. Wood was her relative because it's all in one sentence. And so I had been trying to find him in her family tree to no luck. But now it's totally obvious to me that this is his brother, Dr. Judson Wood, a dentist in Richmond, Virginia. So now I felt like this was like the first thing that really connected the two families together, right? But I still didn't know why. Trying to trace Emma and Frank Wood has not been easy. I mean, not only is this a pretty common name, but they moved all over the place, and trying to figure out if it's the right Frank Wood or F.B. Wood, which is what he went by a lot, was really hard. But Frank was charming. He would make an impression when he came to town, and he always got them to write up about him coming to town, and so his exploits were often in the news. And they settled in Kansas in a town called Marion near the border of Arkansas for a while, and it was there that everything sort of fell apart. Frank was embroiled in a huge scandal of his own making. It was so bad that the governor of Arkansas put out a reward for his capture. Papers intimated that if he was ever found, he would probably be hung before he ever made it to jail. This, my friends, was the motive that I'd been searching for, a reason why he would want to change his name and disappear. I know, I haven't told you what he did, and you can't tell from this slide because I hid it. But don't worry, we'll come back to it, and I'm going to tell you all about it. So, remember I told you there's nothing about O.C. Lacey before 1889. Well, there's also nothing about Frank Wood after 1888. So their timelines do not overlap, with the one exception of his father's obituary. And then you can kind of see it in the family chart that I did, because he's the only one without a birth date and the only one without death information. And that's because I got those pieces of information from their death information, which became more available later in the years. But the final piece of the puzzle came in an interview that Emma did during that scandal. In it, she describes her marriage to Frank Wood almost identically to how Emma Lacey did in her divorce testimony, down to the same marriage date of December 23rd that does not match the marriage license that says December 22nd. I tend to go with Emma. I'm pretty sure she knows when she got married, right? So now at this point, there was no doubt in my mind. I am now 100% sure that O.C. Lacey was originally Frank B. Wood. By all accounts, Frank Wood was born into a wealthy, well-respected, religious, patriotic, and prosperous family. His father was a pharmacist and had his own drugstore businesses. All of his siblings did well for themselves in business or politics or marrying into those things. But Frank just went down a different path for reasons that are unknown, but sometimes there's just a black sheep who doesn't fit in. When he was young, he did work in his father's drugstore, but that clearly didn't take. This is his youngest sister. She's up there because these are the only pictures that I have found of his family. So there you go. All right, so who was Frank Wood? Well, at the age of 22, we start to see that he was searching for something. He was a traveling salesman for the Singer Sewing Machine Company. But my friends, he had an interesting side hustle. Let me read you this description. There is a young gentleman, Mr. F.B. Wood, connected with the office of the Singer sewing machine in this place, who possesses the power of magnetism in a very large degree. He has the most entire control of many persons on whom he has practiced his power, and can make them dance, hold out their arms for any length of time, make them shut their eyes and be unable to open them. He clearly had a lot of charisma. This was written up in the paper multiple times. And whether because of this show, this weird show, or some other nefarious reason, within weeks of this, the Singer Sewing Machine Company put out this notice saying, yeah, don't give your money to him because he doesn't work for us anymore. And it was in the paper for weeks. Weeks. It just feels a little scammy, doesn't it? A little scammy. So that was in 1873. That was the same year he married Emma, and that was in North Carolina. And so I think at some point during this time was when he met her. I mean, maybe she went to the hypnotist show and thought he was great. I don't know. But I don't know where they met. It's just supposition on my part. It does appear that they lived in North Carolina for quite some time, at least until the 1880 census, but maybe a few years after that. And after that, they moved a lot. And by the 1880s, Frank had become an auctioneer, which led him to real estate sales, which ended up being the profession that he settled on for most of his life. He would arrive at a new place, talk about how great it was. People would remark on his charm, his charisma, and how great he would be for the promotion of their town or their county or whatever. He would make some investments, usually making some money, and eventually moving on to somewhere else and doing it all over again. And look at some of these descriptions. I mean, it's hilarious. Let's see. Did I write it here? Okay. We understand that F.B. Wood has talked the horns off a large number of Kentucky Shorthorns. He certainly has the ability. He is a rustler from way back. And if he can't get the ear of the home-hunting immigrant, no one can. It's good. Oh, Frank. So in 1887, he ends up in Marion, Kansas. This is an artist's rendering of Marion in 1887. You can kind of see the courthouse off in the distance. His partner there was H.L. Kamen, and they sold real estate, insurance, and made loans, and it was right next to the courthouse. There's one of their advertisements and a little map of the town where they had their office. So since we're talking about the Midwest and we're Northwest people, I thought I would share with you some of the places we're going to be talking about. So Marion is there. Do I have a thingy? Oh, I don't know that that's helpful. All right, so anyway, there's Marion in eastern Kansas, and Topeka and Kansas City are a couple of other towns that kind of show up in our story. And then the scandal happens down in Arkansas in Eureka Springs. And then an important event also happens in Berryville. And then Monette, Missouri, is on the rail line in between the two towns and is also the site of an important event in the story. All right, are you ready to hear what happened? All right, let's get on with it. So our friend Frank Wood, he was off making deals in Topeka, Kansas, Seligman, Missouri, all kinds of places, telling them how great Marion was and how they should invest and all that. But in May of 1888, he decides that he just needs a little holiday for his health. I mean, good on him, recognizing when you need to take a break from life and have a respite. We'll just set aside for a moment that his wife was legitimately seriously sick and had been for nearly 2 years while he traveled all over the Midwest making deals, leaving her alone at home. Does this sound like somebody else you know? So he decides to go to Eureka Springs. They're famous for their healing waters, you know. Maybe that's what decided attracted him to go. But in any case, he went down there for rest, and maybe he'd do a little business on the side for fun, just for fun. And when he arrived, he stayed here at the Josephine Hotel, a local hotel and boarding house. And here's a picture of it in 1888, the same year that he was there. And he became acquainted with 3 women who were dining at the Josephine: Mrs. Nowotny and Mrs. Wilson, who were sisters and recent widows, and they were about 10 years older than him. And they were there with their niece, Isophine, Icy for short, Burke. She was 19 and had recently lost her parents. I'm not sure why they were there in Arkansas. They were from Illinois, but they were. So as a little side note, this presentation has been really challenging to find visuals for. There just are not a lot of pictures. So I was really delighted when I found this picture. I just thought it was great luck that I found it with the same year and everything. And then imagine my shock. The back said in the picture were Mr. Wood, Miss Burke, and Mrs. Nowotny. Are you kidding me right now? So after studying this picture carefully, I have determined that these are them. Frank on the left, Miss Isophine Burke in the middle, and Mrs. Nowotny on the right. And look, she's got her arm in his. Isn't that sweet? All right. Although we can't be 100% certain, I feel pretty good about it. All right, back to the story. So, as you might imagine, Frank begins to pay particular attention to this young lady. And when the 3 women decide that they need to cut their dining out for whatever reason, he somehow convinces them that he would be much better off taking a room at their house, becoming a lodger at their house. It's much quieter, and he just is there for his rest, and he needs to have quiet. He must have been charismatic because he totally convinced them to do this. And not too long after he is installed at their home, he calls for a doctor. And this is what the newspaper later said about it. Upon the doctor's arrival, he found Wood with fever and very much excited. Wood told him that his wife, to whom he had been married 15 years, was insane. And the very thought of it was almost driving him crazy. That he had come to Eureka to obtain rest from his long vigil with his wife. That he had left her with a relative at St. Joseph, Missouri. While telling this, he frequently would burst into a flood of tears, and it seemed to be with great difficulty that he could restrain himself long enough to say a dozen words at any one time. Upon the doctor's second visit, Wood asked him if he would tell the ladies of the house of his troubles, that they no doubt would think very strange of his conduct, as he had said nothing to them of his affairs. I mean, was that smart or what, to have the doctor, the trusted man of authority, tell them this story? Brilliant mind, really genius. Not long after this, he was seen walking about town with Miss Icy. And although the aunts, they really liked Frank, they thought he was a stand-up guy. But their potential relationship didn't meet with their approval because, dude, he was still married. And then his story began to morph into the fact that his wife was just so very ill that she was likely to expire at any moment. And he'd been in Eureka Springs for about 3 weeks at this point. And I'm wondering why people didn't wonder why he wasn't with his wife if she was that sick. I don't know the answer to that. So at that point, he does leave town to see after his sick wife. And when he comes back, he is wearing crepe on his hat, which was a term used back then to refer to the fact that men would wear these hats with ribbons that would show that they were in mourning. And he came bearing this obituary. Died on Tuesday, June 5th, Catherine E. Wood, wife of Frank Wood and youngest daughter of the late Judge Brown of Atlanta, Georgia. The deceased was well known in this city, though a resident of Kansas. Though she did not suffer, yet her illness was protracted. Everything was done for her that loving hearts and hands could do. A loving wife and a Christian lady has been taken from friends and relations that will greatly miss her. What they didn't know was that he wasn't visiting his wife at all. He was in Kansas City putting this fake obituary in the newspaper. I mean, he put this in there to convince them that she was dead so that he could court this cute girl, right? And the obituary is carefully worded so that people won't know it was him. Notice it says Catherine E. instead of Emma C. Her middle name was Catherine, but with a C. And that all that stuff about Judge Brown, that's a bunch of hooey. That's not true at all. So he apparently, though, didn't think that this was convincing to them enough. Funnily enough, the aunts still thought, his wife did just die, right? That he needed to convince them more of this. Somehow, he managed to convince his actual wife, Emma, to come to Eureka Springs and pretend to be his sister-in-law. This is what she said about it in an interview later. He wrote me while he was in Eureka to come, as I could be of material interest to him in securing the sale of real estate in which he would receive a large commission. To help my husband, I came. He met me and told me that to carry out the arrangement and perfect the sale, that I must claim to be his sister-in-law. I first refused. He pled and begged, stating that if I would do it, he could effect the sale and realize the profits and come home. Finally, I consented, much against my will. And after this, when in the presence of Miss Icy Burke, he made me say I was his sister-in-law and his wife was dead and that I nursed her. I could not stand this terrible strain long and went back home where he promised he would come in a few days. So with everyone finally convinced that his wife was really dead, his plan to court Icy could begin in earnest. So in August, he had a friend help him arrange to get a marriage license in secret because he said they wanted it to be a surprise to their friends and family. He asked Icy to come with him to Berryville, Arkansas. It's not really certain, not clear whether she knew why she was going there or if he sprung it on her, but in any event, they were married in Arkansas, in Berryville. This hotel, the LaBelle House, was where they were married, right next to the courthouse, super convenient. The local paper got wind of the marriage and were about to print it, and he ran down to the paper and begged them not to because it was going to interfere with some real estate transactions if people knew. And somehow he managed to keep it out of the paper. Meanwhile, back in Marion, his actual wife is still actually really sick and in dire need of help and care, and his business partner is concerned. And he starts sending him a telegram every day. Please come home to Marion. Your wife is very ill. But he's busy on his honeymoon. He can't be bothered to go back to take care of his wife. But I think he kind of can see things are starting to come apart. So in an effort to kind of get things under control, he goes back to Marion. You would think that he was going back there to ensure she was okay, right? No, of course not. Instead, she's sick, but she needs to come with him to Monette, Missouri, because he needs to get some stuff off his chest. So he confesses everything to her. Meanwhile, he also sends for Icy, wife number 2, and it's not clear exactly what this timeline was, but clearly they both were told what was going on, and they all went back to town together. This is what Emma said about returning. He came and brought me to Manette, Missouri, and acknowledged his crime of bigamy. I tried to leave him. I could not bear the thought. He told me he would be murdered if I did not come to Eureka Springs and still claim I was his sister-in-law. And he brought me here after having his other wife to come to Manette, where I was quite sick and helpless. I was broken completely down. To save him, I still claimed I was his sister-in-law until I found out he had left. So the reason why this kind of all came apart was because newspapers shared information, right? And they reported on all the little comings and goings and all the happenings. And eventually it was like, hey, did you hear about this thing? No, that's not what happened. It was this thing. So this is kind of how it was described in the paper. The double role of Mr. Wood's character was brought to a sudden climax yesterday by the receipt of a letter from Marion at the Echo office in which the writer gave positive information of the true identity of the woman who was claimed to be the sister-in-law of Wood. In order to make sure of Wood's capture before he had time to get away, Mrs. Nowotny, at whose house Wood was keeping the two wives, was sent for and the letter shown to her. To the surprise of To the surprise of all, knowing to the circumstance, so greatly was her mind deceived by Wood that she not only denounced the writer of the letter as a scoundrel, accused the editor of the Echo of trying to get up a scandal in order to sell papers, but went straight home and told Wood of the contents of the letter. Then it was her turn to be surprised because instead of denying the truthfulness of the letter, he broke down and, weeping like a child, acknowledged the whole matter from beginning to end and begged for her forgiveness, and told her to tell the wronged woman of his confession, pleading his love for Miss Burke as his only excuse. Mrs. Nowotny advised him to leave and offered to let him have money to bear his expenses in his flight. Oh, Frank. So this is some of the newspaper coverage when the scandal broke. A lot of these were full-page, in-depth stories with all those interviews with Emma and everything, and with his business partner. Some of these headlines are so great. A heartless wretch, a sly rascal, a little scoundrel. So good. So one of these articles reported that they captured him, the one that says behind the bars, but it was the wrong guy. They didn't get him. And the governor of Arkansas put out a reward for his arrest and capture, but no one ever found him. There were a couple of sightings over the next few weeks, and one paper even reported that a Frank Wood was heading to Washington, and I'm guessing at that point he was like, I think it's time to change my name. A few months after the scandal, he shows up in Olympia, reinvented as O.C. Lacey. So there you have it. Oliver Chester Lacey was born Frank B. Wood. My research has taken me down many other avenues, and I think there may yet be more to discover, but he did have no children. I think maybe he couldn't because he didn't with either wife. Unless, who knows, DNA, I don't know. But so there aren't any descendants. His second wife, Ida, had a child, but she didn't have any children, so there really aren't any. So I don't think there's any hope of getting anything through family members. But maybe I'll do a follow-up sometime because there's some more great stories in there. So there it is. Thank you.
Okay, folks, we are going to move to the Q&A section of tonight's program. So as a reminder, raise your hand if you have a question, and I can come over with a microphone, and then we are going to be switching between online and in-person questions.
Where was he buried at?
He was buried in Virginia, Hampton, Virginia. Yep.
Okay, online somebody says, any thoughts about renaming Lacey after, after Emma Lacey instead of the abusive OC? A very good point.
Oh, I love it. Let's rebrand. We're named after Emma.
There you go. I missed at the beginning when you said that what the name of the post office was going to be, and then they put in Lacey.
Woodland.
Whitland?
Woodland.
Woodland, okay, thank you.
Let's talk a little about the irony that it was changed from Woodland to Lacey when his original name was Wood. I mean, that's awesome.
So in those days, like he came across country and conveniently was able to change his name. I'm assuming that it was as easy as that. You could just
He
reinvent
just
yourself.
came to town and said, "This is my name." They didn't have to do anything.
So could you just show up somewhere and be whoever you wanted to be, and as long as you could pull it off?
100%.
Wow, interesting.
And our Frank was clearly a good actor. I mean, he had to be, right? I mean, he's not super duper handsome or anything, at least not by my opinion, but he clearly had some charm.
Somebody is asking, do you know what happened to Icy?
Yes, actually, she married a lovely man named Nathan Dresser and had 3 lovely children, and it seems a nice life. So she wasn't ruined forever.
Do they know what the illness was that his first wife had? Because it seemed like she was sick for a while.
In one newspaper account, it said that she had malarial fever, which, I mean, I'm no medical professional, but I do think that comes back. But if you lived with this man, wouldn't you be sick? What I can't get over is, why did she go with him? How did that happen? That's so weird. Yes, Olivia?
I know this probably could be a whole nother presentation, but could you maybe tell us a little bit about his second wife?
Oh, he met his match with her. Well, I'll tell you by telling you this. My theory. She was married 4 times. Her first husband, Howard, died at age 35 after they'd been together about 7 or 8 years. Her second husband, Henry, died at age 40 after about 5 years. Her third husband, John, died at age 56 after about 2.5 years. Her fourth husband, O.C. Lacey, died at age 56 after 3 years. That's all. Now, remember I mentioned just briefly that he'd had an affair? That was Ida's sister. That was Ida's sister, and I think maybe it wasn't just Ida's sister. I think it was both of them. And they were both pieces of work. I mean, I can't find her sister after she leaves California. It's a whole long story, but I think she took a page out of the book of him and changed her name, and I can't find her. But yeah, I think he met his match in her. She got the nice house on the waterfront.
Okay, we have another online question. For his career as a judge, did he make any historical impact for the area here besides the name of the town?
I don't think so. I mean, I haven't dived super deep into his cases or anything. I've read every article, but it doesn't seem like there was anything earth-shattering. What mostly stood out to me was when he was making these judgments against these terrible husbands, and I was like, oh my gosh, the irony, right? He is this terrible guy, and he's sending these other people to prison for the same thing he's doing. Yep.
Do we know what was required to be appointed as a judge back then, or was it just, okay, you're a judge?
No, that is something that would be really interesting to to look into. I was wondering that too about passing the bar, because it didn't take him any time at all. I mean, it was like a few months.
Well, and the
So
ease with
clearly
which
the
he skipped-
bar wasn't set high.
Well, and also just the way that he skipped out with like supposedly a full caseload.
I
and
know,
then
right?
Just,
And then he could just come back. How did that work?
yeah.
Yeah, it was super weird.
He seems to be a pretty sketchy character.
Yeah, totally.
I'm just wondering about the scandal when it came out about how he was treating his wife in Olympia and it drove him out of town. But in everything she said about him, she never revealed
Nope.
his secret.
No one knew. Remember, nobody knew who her relatives even were. They couldn't find them, probably because they had the wrong name.
It's strange that she didn't.
Yeah, and she totally kept his secret. He must have like really done a number on her, mentally and emotionally. When you're in an abusive relationship like that, you're just convinced that it's you, and they can just do a lot of things that seem crazy from the outside.
Well, and this fella he has a really common profile for the kind of people that today we call psychopaths. I mean, his ability to charm, he's very charming. He can more or less brainwash people to go along with him and not challenge him. I mean, from the point of modern criminology, this fella is not that mysterious in terms of his game plan.
Yeah.
So, Erin, with all that moving around and everywhere, did you find anything that was like real estate scams, or where he was taking sums of money from all these people with the scoundrel, or was it just relationship scoundrel?
There were a few things that sounded maybe a little sketchy, or where he was called out for some things, but there was nothing super bad in the real estate. But you do have to wonder with him moving around all the time. And I'm sure there were plenty of, like, I can't find stuff on when he lived in Kentucky or why he left there very much. So either he didn't make too much of an impression there, or he, left town in a hurry. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know too much about that. Anything else online, Olivia?
No, not at the moment. We've said this before, but I can ask you again. Do you think that he got the inspiration for the name Oliver from one of his family members? Because I saw that one of his brothers was called Oliver, and I know you said that he didn't go by that. Maybe they had like a strained relationship or something. I don't know.
I think he had a strained relationship with his whole family.
That would make sense.
One of his siblings listed him in their obituaries or anything like that. He is nowhere to be found. But yes, actually, when I was researching his family, his brother, his younger brother, is Charles Oliver. And if you flip that, it's OC. And he never went by Oliver. But I don't know if you noticed, but his brother's wife was also named Emma. And it just, I do feel like, I have no idea where he got the name Lacey from, but I do feel like that was kind of the inspiration for the OC. You take stuff that you know, I guess. It might not be, but who knows?
All right, any other questions? All right, can we get a round of applause again for Erin?
Thank you.